How are you guys doing this morning? Good? Sorry, I was a little late walking up here. Anyway, good place to be this morning, yes? Good. Listen, I'm so thankful to be up here this morning and to be able to do this and just for this opportunity. So it's going to be a fun time. I don't mind crowd participation, so if you guys want to laugh and make this a little less awkward for me so that I don't start sweating, it'll be a good time up here. So quick poll. Who in here is a baseball fan? Do we have any baseball fans in the room? Okay, so quite a bit. Good deal, good deal. So of those, how many are Pirates or Cardinals fans? Raise your hand. I need to know who I need to pray for that they find salvation today. Well, I'm a diehard Cincinnati Reds fan. Always have been. Okay? So, like, Johnny Bench, Pistol Pete, like my favorite baseball player of all time, Ken Griffey Jr., comes from the Mariners to the promised land of Cincinnati. And it's just a good time, right? Like, I love baseball. I love going to games. I love going and just, like, the atmosphere and, like, the field and getting down there and, like, the smell of food and, like, it's just a good time. If you've never been there, you need to go. Any game, just as long as it's not Pirates or Cardinals. Anyway, so funny story. I was at work. This was a couple years back. I was in college, and I had a friend of mine text me while I was at work one day, and he said, "Hey, man," he's like, "Reds are playing tonight. It's a night game. I know it's short notice, but do you want to go?" And I was like tonight? And he's like, "Yeah, like a couple hours tonight." And I was like, "Dude, I'm at work right now." And he's like, "So do you want to go?" And I was like, hold on. So I get off, and I'm like, all right, are we leaving? He's like, yeah, we got to go right now. So we go to Cincinnati, and where we decide to go so late, the only seats that were still available at the ballpark were on third baseline, which is typically where the away team sits, right? So we're like the only two people in Reds uniforms on this side, and they're playing the Nationals that night, and like it's just a crazy game. It's one of those games, like, it just doesn't happen often, to the point, like, the final score of this game was 15-12 in baseball. Like, that doesn't happen, right? And so it was one of those games I'll never forget because we're sitting down right on third baseline on the foul line, and if you've ever been to a baseball game and you're sitting on the foul line, you know, like, the number one rule if you're sitting on foul line is that you never take your eyes off the batter. Ever, right? And so we're like halfway through this game, and I'm like sitting here in my chair, and I'm watching the game over here, and I happen to look down for literally like 0.3 seconds at my phone. And so I think I had like home run nachos. If you don't know what those are, they're anointed of God, and they just dump a bunch of nachos into a baseball helmet, and there's like cheese and chili and all kinds of good things of God. And I had those in one hand, I had my phone in the other hand, and I happened to look down for literally like 3 seconds, right? And I hear the crack of the bat, and there's a Nationals fan behind me, and he said, "Hey, Reds, watch out!" And we're the only ones in that section wearing red. And so I happened to look up, and there is a screaming line drive coming straight toward my face. I'm not talking about like pop fly where we can look up and be like, "Hey, there's the ball, it's coming." Like line drive screaming at me. Like if you've ever been around like a fastball, like it was hissing. One of those things, right? And so I have enough time to drop my home run nachos, which I'm still salty about. And I drop my phone, and I do one of these things to try to, like, miss my face, and it hits me in the shoulder and, like, skids up the bleachers like 3 rows. And so I don't know if you've ever felt that pain, but there's people all around me, and they're asking me, they're like, "Man, are you all right? You all right?" And holding back tears, and I'm in college at this time. I'm like, "Yeah, I'm good, man. I'm good." And I have, like, baseball stitches bruised into my shoulder. And so there's, like, a bunch of hustle and commotion. And I just so happened to look down, and the baseball had rolled back down underneath the bleachers to where it was sitting right beside me. And, like, it just so happened the batter was, like, my favorite Reds player at the time. And about the time that I looked down and said, "Hey, there's the ball," this little kid who, mind you, wasn't even a Reds fan. He was wearing a Nationals jersey, reaches down, picks up the ball, and, like, holds it up. He gets on, like, the Jumbotron, and everybody's like, yeah, like, clapping for this little kid. And I'm like, hold on. I was like, I just took a smoking fastball, like 95 mile an hour out of the pitcher's hand, probably like $130, $140 off the bat to the shoulder, and this kid is the kid that's getting recognition. He doesn't even like the Reds, and he doesn't even know who Joey Votto is. Like, I was salty about it. And to this day, I'll never forget it, because I was like, man, like, I took the shot there, right? Like, I was the one who put in the work, and I wasn't the one who got the recognition for it. It was this little kid. Like, he got a letter of authenticity and was like, you caught this ball by this batter. And I was like, he didn't catch nothing. My shoulder caught the ball. And, you know, all this awesome stuff that you get if you catch a ball. And while that story's funny, I was sitting there and I was thinking about that story the other day while Pastor Matt was preaching. And I was just kind of like, God, you know, why are you bringing this back up into my memory? And while that's funny, I think a lot of us can relate to that on a much more serious and a much deeper level. And that is that we put in work, right? We do our jobs, we do things, and we do them well, and we want that recognition or that appreciation that comes from that. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, right? Like, we all have this natural desire to be recognized for the work that we do. We all have this natural desire to just feel appreciated for the hard work that we put in, for the shots that we take on a daily basis that life throws at us, right? And I asked God, I was just like, you know, God, who does this apply to? Who are you trying to speak to through this? And he brought a couple of groups of people to my mind. And the first one was like healthcare workers, right? Like, I think of healthcare workers over the last 2 years and just the shots that you guys have taken. And, you know, you work 4 12-hour shifts in a row only to be met with like another one. And you're like, can I just get an attaboy or something? And it's like, I know that you don't do what you do just to get recognition from it, that you have a love and a passion for people to do what you do, but it feels good just to get recognized or to feel appreciated, right? Or I think of like teachers. Teachers, more flexible in the last 2 years than anybody that I can think of, right? And you're just like, man, it would feel good just to feel a little bit appreciated, and you got some crazy parents emailing you, and it's never their kid's fault, and all that stuff, and I think of those people. I think of like the corporate worker, right, that they're putting in the extra time. They're showing up early. They're staying late. And that extra time that they're putting in, that's not showing up on their paycheck. But they're doing that because they want to see that open door. They want to see that promotion come. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. Or I think, you know, lastly, like the stay-at-home mom. Like the stay-at-home mom who's cooking, who's cleaning, who's making sure the house is nice, and somehow you still find time to have like a warm meal on the table when everybody gets home. Like, that's awesome. And I know you don't do that for recognition, but it's good to feel appreciated, right? And so, again, I don't think that natural desire to want to be recognized, to want to be appreciated is a bad thing, but it's when that desire has you that it can become dangerous. Because what happens is when you don't get that recognition, or when you don't maybe get that appreciation, what happens is you become frustrated. I found myself in a position where I wasn't getting that recognition, I wasn't getting that appreciation, and I became frustrated. I would have thoughts like, I did all the work, but he or she is getting the spotlight for it. Or you become tired because you have thoughts like, I'm working so hard to do this, and no one even notices that I'm alive or doing any of this hard work, right? Or it can get to a place where you almost feel hopeless, right? It's like, I gave it my all. I went above and beyond, and nobody appreciated it, so what's the point of giving it my all? Or what's the point of going above and beyond? And so, again, I don't think that having that desire is necessarily a bad thing, but when it has you and it becomes the way that you find validation in your life, it can become dangerous. And it's so easy to do, right? It's like we don't wake up and say, you know, I want this natural desire to feel appreciated, to imprison me and be the way that I find validation in my life. But when we live in a culture that says that you are validated by recognition, it's easy to allow that to become something that imprisons us. I mean, think about it. You open your phone, you get on social media. If you don't have so many likes, you're not good enough. If your bank account doesn't have this many commas, you're not important. You know what I mean? And so when we're born into that, sometimes it can become a prison. Because maybe there's somebody here who was like me. I didn't find the validation that I was looking for because I wasn't getting that recognition. And so what did I do? I went and looked for it. I went and looked for that recognition. I went and looked for that validation. And you know where I looked, and I feel like a lot of people look, was through comparison. And comparison is the number one thief of your joy in life. It's this never-ending race that you can never catch up to. Because what you do now is you just say, well, as long as I'm better than this person, then I'm okay. Or as long as I have it together and I'm making more money than them, I'm getting more likes than them, or whatever the case is, I'll be okay. But the problem with that is that it's a little bit empty. Because what you do and what I did is that I compared my normal life to someone else's filtered life. And it's a battle that you'll never win. Because you know the real you. And you know all of you, the part of you that nobody else knows, right? And you're comparing it to someone else's filtered life that they post on social media. And so again and again and again, I felt myself just let down. And I felt hopeless because you find yourself in this cycle of, I need validation. Let me compare myself to somebody else. My real life to their filtered life led to disappointment. That disappointment says, Brandon, you got to work harder. That harder work leads to, I need more validation. And so it's just this never-ending cycle. Need validation, comparison, disappointment, work harder, need validation, comparison, disappointment, work harder, and it goes on and on and on and on to the point where you just feel tired and you just say, what's the point, right? And so I was thinking about this. I was thinking about the baseball story. I was thinking about, this Finding Freedom series and just feeling trapped by that cycle of needing recognition, and then it becomes your validation, and you got to work harder, and then you become tired. And I felt like God spoke to me in that moment, and he just began to speak this powerful one sentence. And he said, recognition can lift you, but it cannot sustain you. Because recognition is temporary, right? It can hold you up for a moment. It's not always a bad thing, but it can't hold you. It cannot sustain you because it's temporary. Recognition comes from the words of man. But what goes so much deeper than recognition is revelation. And revelation comes from God. And what comes from God is eternal. So Luke 15, if you got your Bibles, if you want to turn there real quick. I got to tell you guys a story. Luke 15, Jesus, I'm just going to paraphrase a lot of this. You can read it. But Luke 15, Jesus is sitting at a table, and he's sitting there with sinners and tax collectors and all these people that people didn't really like in those times, right? And there was another group of people there, and they were the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the religious leaders of that time, okay? And so Jesus is at this table, and it's just this beautiful picture of God's grace in that moment, because Jesus, the King of Kings, higher than any other name, has this desire to sit with sinners and tax collectors, like some of the most hated people, some of the people who cheated and lied to make money for themselves. And so the Pharisees and the religious leaders are like, why is Jesus sitting with this group of people? And they were mad, and they were disgruntled, and they were murmuring against Jesus. And so Jesus, in that moment, begins to teach the Pharisees and the religious leaders. And a lot of times when Jesus teaches, he tells stories. He tells stories to help illustrate his point. And in Luke chapter 15, he tells 3 stories, one of which is like Hall of Fame parables in that time. And it was the story of the prodigal son. And it's one of the most famous stories in the Bible. And if you don't know it, quick run through. So Jesus tells the story of this father, and that father has 2 sons, right? The younger son comes to the father one day and says, Dad, I want to get all of my inheritance. I want you to give it to me now, divide it out, and I want you to give me my portion of the inheritance. And so the father agrees, and he says, okay. So he divides up his inheritance. He gives it to the younger son. The younger son then goes off into a foreign city, and he completely wastes and blows all of his inheritance. Completely just wasted on meaningless and empty things, to the point like he can't even provide for himself or find food. And so he's thinking to himself, and he's like, man, like my servants who work for my dad back home, like they have it better off than what I do right now. And so in this moment of shame, the younger son decides that he's going to go back home to the father, right? He's going to return home to his dad because he's like, I either return home or I'm going to die because I don't have a way of providing for myself. And so he goes home. And the younger son almost, expecting to be shamed by the father, expecting disappointment. And if you guys know the story, the father sees the younger son a far way off, and he runs after the younger son. He doesn't wait for the younger son to return all the way home. He runs after him, right? And he takes all this, like, dirty clothes off of him. He puts, like, the best robe on him, puts, like, the family's ring on him and says, son, I am so glad that you're home. So glad. And the son's like, Dad, I just blew like everything that you, and he's like, I don't care. Like, I'm just glad that you're home. Like, let's have a feast. Let's celebrate. My son is home, and I'm so proud of you. Again, another picture of God's grace, God's love for the people that mess up, and I am thankful for that. But this story that God showed me, he showed it to me from a different perspective this time, and that was the perspective of the older brother. The older brother's never really talked about in this story because the famous Bible story, it's always on the younger son. But if I can relate for a minute, like the older son, in verse 28, I want to read to you what the older son was going through in that moment. It says, the older brother stalked off in an angry sulk and refused to join in. His father came out and he tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't listen. And the older son said, look how many years I've stayed here serving you, never giving you one moment of grief. And have you ever thrown a party for me and my friends? He says, then this son of yours, his younger brother, who has thrown away your money on prostitutes, shows up and you go all out with a feast? And his father says, son, you don't understand. You are with me all the time. And everything that is mine is yours. But this is a wonderful time, and we had to celebrate. This brother of yours was dead, and now he's alive. He was lost, and he's found. And so in this story that Jesus is telling, the older brother represents religion. It represents this relationship based upon doing the right thing. To this, we reduce relationship with Jesus down to a checklist, right? And that's not what relationship with Jesus is about. But if I can be honest with you, and if I can speak to all the real people in the room, like, I've related to that older brother. Because I've been to a place where it's like, I've been doing the right thing. I've been here. I've kept my nose down, and I've been doing the work, and I haven't complained. I haven't done anything wrong. I haven't taken what you've given me and blown it on things that doesn't matter. And you're going to throw a party for him? Or you're going to give that promotion to him? Or that recognition is going to go to that guy? Like, I've been there. And it's exhausting, and it's discouraging. But I looked at that story, and I love how the father responded to the older son. In a moment that older son was looking for recognition, the father responded with a fresh revelation. Because he recognized that recognition can only hold you for so long. If you look back in that verse, it says, you are with me all the time, and everything that is mine is yours. In that moment, the father was giving the older son the revelation of identity. He says, you're mine. You're with me all the time. It's relationship. God, or the Father, was giving that revelation of relationship with Jesus. And he understood. He said, look, I know you're looking for recognition, but I have something that goes so much deeper, and that's relationship. And when you understand whose you are, that's a revelation that goes so much deeper that suddenly you appreciate the recognition, but you don't need it, right? Because you remember whose you are. And he says, all that I have is yours. And so he is offering the older son a revelation of inheritance. He's saying, everything that I have is yours. And that's something that goes so much farther than a little bit of recognition. Revelation of our inheritance in Jesus Christ takes us to the end of time. Because we know that one day, all of this is nothing but a flower that fades, right? But when we have the inheritance of God, when we know whose we are, suddenly we are no longer prisoned by this cycle of comparison. I've got to work harder. Oh, I need validation. I got to work harder. I didn't get the recognition I need. And suddenly you say, I knows who I am. I am a son of the King of Kings, and he offers me an inheritance as a free gift, something that I don't have to earn. He gives it to me as a free gift. And that will break the prison of needing recognition in your life. And so in the moment, I just want to, in Ephesians, Paul talks about this. In Ephesians 1:11 through 12, it says, it's in Christ that we find out who we are. Purpose. That's what we're all looking for, purpose. And culture says you find that purpose through recognition. And Jesus says you find that purpose in me. And it goes on, it says, and what we are living for, long before we first heard of Christ, and we got our hopes up, he had his eye on us. He had designs on us for glorious living, part of the overall purpose that he is working out in everything and in everyone. And so as you guys stand to your feet this morning, and I think the band's going to come back up, I just want to offer this thought. When it comes to this series, when it comes to finding freedom, when it comes to just breaking free and living in true freedom, I struggled, I don't want to say I struggled. I wrestled with this message because, it's something that hit home to me. And usually the ones that I wrestle with are the ones that need to be said. And so I just would dare to believe that maybe there's someone here this morning that was like me, who found themselves in that cycle of appreciating recognition, and then culture gets involved, right? 2020 comes around, social media comes around, and you feel like there's this false illusion of, I need this recognition. And you need this appreciation. You need the words of man in order to be validated. And I just want to offer you again, I'm not the guy that says never look for recognition, never appreciate someone, encourage you. I'm not saying that. But maybe if you find yourself discouraged this morning because you haven't gotten it, maybe you feel tired because you've looked for it and you've worked and you've worked and you've worked, and you see all these people accelerating past you at a faster pace, and you're just like, I've been here. Like, I've been putting in the time. And all these other people seem to be accelerating at a faster pace than me. I just want to offer you a moment of rest. Because what I learned is when I didn't get that recognition, when I didn't find those words that I was looking for, it was when I retreated back with the Father and I just took time to remember whose I was, that He allowed me to find rest in that moment. And I still have tough weeks, right? There's still weeks that you put in the work, that you put in the time, and you're not feel like you're accelerating at the pace that you should be. It's a constant retreat back to the Father's revelation. It's just like the older son. When he was looking for recognition, the Father wanted to give him something so much deeper. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's not an eternal thing. It's temporary. It can hold you, but it cannot sustain you. Relationship with the Father can sustain you. When you feel tired, when you feel like that you're not getting what you need to get in life, retreat to the Father, man. Go back to that word. Go back to spending time with Him in prayer and just say, God, remind me of whose I am. And I believe that He'll begin to sing songs over you of adoption and just saying, you're my son, you're my daughter in whom I'm well pleased. You don't have to earn that. It's a free gift that I give to you. All you have to do is just accept it. And I think that embrace, that hug from the Father will help you to find rest in a time that you feel tired. And it'll give you the strength to carry on when you're like, I still haven't found the recognition, but I know who I am. And I know who I am in Christ. And that's helped me, and I pray that it helps you this morning. So I'm just going to pray real quick. So if you guys would just bow your heads.